Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smuga-Otto, author of the humorous fantasy series Boy Bands and Dragons. The first book, Our Comeback Tour Slaying Monsters, will be released this year by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to another episode of Words to Write By.
We are doing The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. We have been working on the archetypes, the characters in people's stories, and now we are going to actually move to that darn writer's journey step by step.
Right. He did do a little preview in the very beginning of the book, I guess the too long don't read version, and I created a study guide for the hero's journey using The Hobbit as an example with lots of pictures and all sorts of stuff. So you can get that little primer on our website if you'd like a study guide. And we're going on to the first step now that we're done with the archetypes. Book 2, Stages of the Journey. Stage 1, The Ordinary World.
And before we start in the ordinary world, we have a new book to accompany us to use examples from on our reading because there's a lot of movie examples in here. And so the book we've chosen is John Scalzi, Kaiju Preservation Society.
Yeah, the cover's great. I can tell what's going to happen. You know, I never heard of this book. Kim's the one who suggested it. And I mentioned it to some friends at my book club. They've all read it now. The moment I brought it up, they're like, wait, what is it? They love the title so much. And now they're finished. And I'm like, we went camping. And I'm like, you guys cannot tell me the plot. They were trying to tell me. I'm like, no spoilers.
It's a fast read.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun. If you haven't picked it up yet or started listening to it, now's the time.
So John Scalzi has been writing for a number of years. He got the Hugo in 2013 for his story Red Shirts, which was inspired about all the Star Trek extras that disappear on the missions.
Yeah. We actually analyzed a paragraph from that book a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah. Besides being a prolific writer, he's also has a great blog. He's very open about his writing process and being a writer. So good stuff. Definitely a cool writer to check out. So the Kaiju Preservation Society was written in 2021. Did you read the back of the book with the acknowledgments?
No, but, you know, I heard about it because my friends, when we went camping, they had to tell me all about it. I was like, you guys, stop telling me things. But yeah, I heard the story of the novel.
Which is?
As it was told to me, I have not read it, but as it was told to me during camping, thank you, Yvonne and Daryl, he was trying to write a different book. And it was the first time he had a writer's block. And he usually turns everything in on time to his publisher or his agent or whatever. And this time he actually couldn't. So he called on the day it was due and said, look, I'm just not going to make the deadline. But the moment he hung up the phone, he suddenly felt like mentally like free from that burden of a book. And that allowed Kaiju Preservation Society, that book, to come into his brain. And he wrote it like really fast.
He wrote it in about 2 months.
Damn.
Now, the other part of the story there is that he had the writer block in 2020, which kind of makes sense because of all the stuff that happened in 2020.
Right. It was a pandemic book.
No, his book that he was writing wasn't a pandemic book. This one he wrote in, like I said, beginning of 2021, and it was definitely in response to the pandemic. The book is set at the height of the pandemic.
Yeah. The pandemic is part of the plot.
Yes, very much tied to it. The other thing he said was that his other book he was writing was a serious, dark book. And part of the reason why he couldn't write it was there was too much serious, dark stuff happening. So he compares this book not so much as a symphony, but as a pop song. And it's meant to be fun and lighthearted and just make you feel good.
Yeah, it feels like that when I read it. I've just started it. Should I just read the back for the synopsis, or should we just tell a quick?
We'll do that when we get to
the analysis.
Yeah, we'll get the analysis. We'll tell you a little more about the book then. And, if you want to read it before you hear the analysis, you have some time right now. We're going to cover the first chapter today, which very much follows the ordinary world.
You've finished the whole book, right?
I've read the whole book through, and I've heard the Will Wheaton audiobook on car rides.
Does it follow all the steps, you think?
I'm thinking it's going to follow really closely. That's part of the reason I suggested it.
Okay.
Before we start the chapter, I wanted to say that while there are some really good ideas in this, I actually thought this was a pretty interesting chapter as compared to some of the other stunts we recently did. He does not know how to organize his points. Like, they're all over the place, and it's just like random. All the points are the same subheading size, and like they repeat each other and they jump around. I'd be writing notes and I realize, I wrote that note in the previous section, but it's got its own section now, and was a little frustrated. How about you?
Yeah. I'll admit I had a couple of glasses of wine by the time I started digging into this last night, and I felt very disoriented. I was like, what the hell is going on here? I did notice in the beginning, I got all teacherly. He didn't punctuate his quote from Joseph Campbell correctly, so I had to mark that as an error.
Then you drank some more wine and it got easier?
No. I did drink more wine, but it didn't get any easier. All right, well,
let's go for it.
All right, so it seems like he does start an organizational principle here with a kind of a thesis. He says the story must hook the reader or viewer, that's 1, set the tone of the story, 2, suggest where it's going, 3, and get across a massive information without slowing the pace.
And that is true. That is what an opening of a book has to do. And it's hard. First chapters are just like you almost write them and then just plan on going back and rewriting them. I do, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually working on the beginning of my book right now. And I'm like, how much am I supposed to reveal here? I just want to make a statement. We've complained about this before, but this is very much based on screenwriting. You will notice that a lot of his principles here not only rely on screenplays and movies as examples, but you can see it. Like, not all novels do this.
Yeah, definitely. But again, we're looking at novels that have quests and are specifically genres. So a lot of novels that are genre have to do this.
Oh, yeah, definitely genre novels.
Yeah, but sometimes he'll reference an opening that's a visual opening of a scene. It's like, yeah, but how are you going to write that?
Right.
So the first part of the chapter is called Before the Beginning. It includes such things as the title, the publicity, advertising, and the cover art, which is all things that an author doesn't actually think about when they're starting a book.
Right.
These are kind of like after the fact ideas. Although they're very important, they actually really do have a big influence when you're starting a book, how you feel.
Right. But, also keep in mind that if you publish a book, you don't have a lot of choice in what happens there, because sometimes, the publisher will be like, well, we don't like the title, or here's the book cover. You don't have control over those things.
Right. So if you're starting a book, you don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. Like you said, it's not going to matter. However, he is right that title, the cover art, sets the reader's expectations. And when you're starting, not when you're first writing your opening chapter, but when you're going back and editing, you should think very strongly about what kind of expectations you're setting in your readers, because you may have a great concept or you may have a great book, but if the reader comes expecting something else, they're not going to be happy. If it's a sad story, but you start with a happy moment in the person's life, a lot of people might not like what comes afterwards.
So it's all about setting up expectations, what you're saying.
Yes.
I thought it was interesting here. He's got it nice and bold. He says the mythological approach to story boils down to using metaphors or comparisons to get across your feelings about life.
I circled your feelings about life and put 2 question marks next to it.
Yeah, like this is the most vague thing. Like, what is he talking about? I mean, I know mythology There's metaphors everywhere. It's a big metaphor for life. Yes, of course. But I feel like he just lifted that out of Joseph Campbell's book and made himself sound really deep.
They didn't explain it or give an example.
No. Why in bold? Why?
He also said, oral storytellers begin their tales with ritualized phrases, once upon a time, and personalized gestures to get the attention of the audience. Not sure how that's useful for book writing.
Well, fairy tales that are written down tend to start with that.
Right, but who's writing fairy tales?
I don't know. Maybe you're writing an anti-fairy tale and you want to use that. But anyway, essentially, there's not much going on before the book. I will say, though, that you did do a lot of prep.
I did.
You started your story, but as Kim was writing it, she had an artist, create pictures and art of each of the characters. And then I would see she put them on the wall, and I'd assume they were used as inspiration.
Definitely.
While you were writing.
Yeah, and I actually ended up writing some scenes based on how the illustrations, the characters ended up. A lot of writers will have mood boards, or they'll have a soundtrack, or they'll do things that put them in the mind of the book that might then be reflected in what the readers will get out of it.
That's interesting. I've never thought of a mood board or mood music. I don't normally like music while I work, but I do have a thing I listen to. It's my Stupid Work is Stupid Spotify playlist, but it's like I play it very low, and it's this like repetitive rat-a-tat pretty much. If you guys like rat-a-tat, it's good working music.
I would sometimes put on some boy bands and listen to those.
Of course you would.
Yes.
All right. So let's go to the title. So he says, a title is an important clue to the nature of the story and the writer's attitude. A good title can become a multi-leveled metaphor for the condition of the hero or his world.
I'd like to say that last night we had a process group. We'd have process groups every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then we alternate with a writer's sprint. One of the people in our process group was talking about the name she wanted to give to a rather long narrative piece she was submitting. And she had a very interesting, intriguing name, and she was working with a writing coach that said, no, it should be something much more plain and boring. The writer coach didn't say plain and boring, but, that was our opinion. And so it shows that, people think a lot about what the title of a piece should be and what it should convey to the audience.
Yeah. My book has gone through multiple titles already. It's like, I was going to name it this, but then my book coach laughed at me and I went, oh, this is bad. Okay. And then I slowly realized this was a bad title. And then I've moved on to other titles. Two of the working titles are Renee Land or Maybe It Would Be Best If You Didn't Come Back. That nice long title seems a little excessive, but a lot of memoirs have long titles, so I could get away with that.
One of the people in the group also then quickly Googled a couple of title names and pointed out that it might be a good idea before you settle on a title to make sure there aren't 8 other versions of it sitting on Amazon.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and then he gives this shit example of The Godfather, which was my dad's favorite movie.
Projecting much?
I guess, yeah, I am, I guess. I'm sorry.
Next one is opening image, a visual metaphor. So, yeah, great. You're not writing a movie.
Yeah. You don't want to just rely on an image in the beginning.
Although I start my book with my main character getting a text to say that he's supposed to go through the back door at this company, and he's directed to a back parking lot with a beige, uninteresting door with a sign dissuading people of unauthorized entry. And I actually specifically wrote, this could be a metaphor for something, but I'm not going there.
Oh, I guess just don't start with the sky. Don't start with your character waking up.
Don't start with your character waking up.
In a movie, yeah, you have to start with an image. But in a book, there's sometimes good lines in the beginning of novels. Like in Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, he said, the very first line is, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Nice beginning line.
Not only is it a good line, but it really sets you up for what you're getting.
Yeah, totally. And it's a statement. Sometimes, books don't start with a statement.
And then we jump to prologue, which technically isn't ordinary world. It's something a little different. I thought he wanted to slide it in here because he tries to cover everything. A little bit about prologues.
He does have how the prologue functions. A prologue can serve several useful functions and may give an essential piece of backstory. 1, cue the audience to what kind of movie or story this is going to be. 2, or 3, start the story with a bang and let the audience settle into their seats. And his shit example is closely counted as the third kind.
Well, the other part of that, start your story with a bang, is I'm going to have several boring chapters following after this, so I want to make sure the audience knows that, violent action stuff is going to happen.
Yeah. Hold on to your seats because, you just have to sleep through the boring part and then the fun stuff will happen.
I think one of the great prologues of modern books is Game of Thrones opening, because it encapsulates so much of like the mood and the atmosphere and the dread. And then he kills off the character. And it's like, just, people you get attached to are going to die in this story.
Right. Yeah. You get a small attachment to the peasant or whatever that's out there. And then the ice guy kills him.
And just kills him straight up. Nothing else. And pointlessness too. Like it didn't matter what he saw because that information isn't getting back to base either.
Right.
I think that's a very wise decision that he made to let you know what was coming, because when then you have a wonderful main character die in the middle of the book, you were warned.
So he doesn't really talk about prologues in the sense that, in movies, I guess one could say there's prologues. I don't know. I don't know enough about screenwriting or movies to be able to say, this movie has a prologue.
Well, I think a prologue by definition is any scene that takes place outside the normal timeline with different characters that aren't going to actually appear in the main part of the story for a while. It's basically something that's plucked out of a time that's not directly related to the narrative.
Memoirs, just from personal experience, a lot of them have prologues. Some people really say bad things about writers using prologues, but that's usually just for novelists. There are a lot of prologues in memoirs. They need them sometimes.
I think some of the negatives are not so much the prologue itself, but labeling it as a prologue, because people tend to pass over it. So the general advice is if you have a prologue, that's fine. You just call it chapter 1.
Right.
Another prologue I really liked was the one in The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Which is an entire made-up story about who this author is, and it just sets you up for the fact that it's the narrative device he's going to use, and it's completely fake. Unless you're in middle school reading it, and then you're like, oh my God, this book. Oh, and he also mentions that a prologue is not necessarily desirable or required in every case of a book. Sometimes you just start with the character and you move forward.
Yep.
So now we finally, after all that, get to the ordinary world.
The ordinary world. I called it home base. Vogler says, because so many stories are journeys that take heroes and audiences to special worlds, most begin by establishing an ordinary world as a baseline for comparison. The special world of the story is only special if we can see it in contrast to a mundane world of everyday affairs from which the hero issues forth.
I think one consequence of this common idea of ordinary world is I naturally assume it's going to be the boring part of the story or the place the hero wants to get away from. So why would I want to spend that much time in the ordinary world? But he does actually give a couple uses of the ordinary world besides just, a baseline comparison. So then the next section is contrast. And he's kind of already mentioned that it's a contrast to the special.
To highlight just how special the special world really is.
Yeah, but then he slides in the fact that the seeds of excitement and challenge can usually be found in the ordinary world section. The hero's problems and conflicts are already present in the ordinary world waiting to be activated.
Interesting. So the problems have already started.
Yeah, it's not just a complete opposite. It actually is relevant to the special world, what happens in the ordinary world.
Yeah, just because it doesn't mean everything's wonderful.
Right, or doesn't mean everything's completely boring and pointless.
Right, there's still some kind of tension. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, the dramas of the special world is leaking into the ordinary world, which is sometimes what starts a quest. You know, The Hobbit, everything's great for like 2 or 3 pages. And then here comes Gandalf. You know, we use The Hobbit a lot as an example.
Next section is foreshadowing, a model of the special world.
Okay. He brings up romancing the stone again. He brings in The Wizard of Oz again as examples. Let's see. The opening fantasy sequence serves a dual purpose. No, that's not a good quote. Do you have a good quote in here?
No, there's no good quotes. When I see foreshadowing, I usually think, oh, this is, you know, some seed that's planted here for me to notice what's coming later. But he also says that foreshadowing can work by demonstrating kind of a mini version of what's going to happen next. Like in Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, he talks about how in the movie, not the books, she is walking on a fence and gets herself into trouble. And the 3 actors that both play farmhands, but then also play the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, run out and rescue her. Very much an example of how she's going to interact with their versions of those characters later on in the movie.
Right. I was thinking of Fight Club. I don't have the book in front of me. It's a damn good book. The movie is damn good too. Once the big reveal happens in the end, you can trace it all back to the beginning.
Right. There's definitely clues from the very beginning of what the twist is going to be.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the foreshadowing is actually a contrast. That's what he had the romancing the stone example. But I was also thinking in Howl's Moving Castle, it opens up with saying that the oldest child never has an adventure.
Right.
And that contrasts with the fact that you have the oldest child then having an adventure. Okay. That's foreshadowing. Next section.
Raising the dramatic question. I got a little excited. I was like, ooh, is he going to give us something good here?
And it came down to, you know, that a hero should have a goal. And the goal is both an inner problem and an outer problem.
Thanks, Vogler. Very helpful. Oh, but he's got different examples. I don't think he's used them before. He uses Ghost. Patrick Swayze's character in Ghost. Oh, and he brings up Pretty Woman.
Yes, although I think he got the main character wrong because he thinks the main character is the upright businessman.
Wait, I mean, is it the prostitute?
Oh, yeah, it's totally Julia Roberts.
I haven't seen this movie in so long.
Yeah. If you actually think of the story, it starts with her experiences as a prostitute, her friend having issues, her needing to... it follows her story from the beginning, and then he shows up in the car. So it's not like it's following him, it's following her.
I see. Man, Vogler's got a very male gaze here. Just very preoccupied.
Although, you know, we'd probably give him grief if he was preoccupied with the prostitute, too.
That's true. That's true.
You can't win.
Well, anyway, so he says, every good story poses a series of questions about the hero. Will she achieve the goal, overcome her flaw, learn the lesson she needs to learn? That's not bad. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the dramatic question. But then the inner and outer problems are rephrasing the dramatic question. This isn't a very good hierarchical organization.
Yeah. Like, okay, why does it even get a bullet point here? Or why does it get a title? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But the inner and the outer problems. You have to have a actual outside world quest. You can't be completely internal. But if you write a story where you're just having the character go through the motions of fighting the monsters and doing stuff, then people are going to get frustrated that there's no inner development. Unless you're writing lit RPG, which apparently, you know, if it's just numbers go up, that can also be your whole focus.
Interesting. So the numbers go up and that represents the inner.
Yes, it's kind of, as we were talking in our conversation with Maddox, that a lot of the thrill of reading has not to do with the inner character development, but like actually a physical number set of stats you can see as the character progresses. So there's the plot, and the internal is a whole bunch of number stats.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so Vogler says that they need an inner problem, a personality flaw, or moral dilemma to work out so that audiences can see characters learning, growing, and dealing with the inner and outer challenges of life. And there are no examples. That is the end. You know, at least Bickham broke this down.
Right.
We have a couple episodes with Bickham, and I'll try to put him in the show notes, that he really addresses this.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get some good material there. But Vogler he tells us we need to do a thing. He does not tell us how to do a thing.
Well, one thing that writers, screenwriters have the advantage of is that you have actors, and actors will embody these things. Good actors will make sure a character has an inner conflict and all that stuff as well. So,
But it has to be part of the plot, too, which is something that has to be written,
that's true.
not just acted.
That's true. But you get a little more freedom when you can count on your actor, which the next section is very much geared towards actors, the making an entrance.
Dun, dun.
I like this idea that, an actor knows that when they, especially if a theater actor, they know that from the very moment that they step on the stage, they have to make an entrance and make an impression. Or if they're there when the lights come up, they have to be doing something that makes an impression. So no waking up in the morning.
No waking up in the morning. Well, wait a minute. I was just thinking of your book. And I was thinking, Kyle, he is a performer, and he does make quite the entrance. And Tristan really makes an entrance because he's like the heartthrob. But Kyle, the main character, he comes in and he establishes his point of view right away. He doesn't mince words. He immediately walks in to the place where they're doing the VR concert, and he just goes right into it.
Right.
Judging people in his head and all sorts of stuff.
No, yeah, I wrote the story, so I would cut it right to the point where the action starts. That's the standard. The problem with getting reading craft books is that you get things repeated again and again because they make a lot of sense. And so you're not going to try to reinvent your approach because someone's already established it. So I can't really fault a person for saying, you should start your scene with action because, you should start your scene with your character doing something.
Right.
Or start your book with your character doing something.
Or when your character makes their entrance, make them do something.
Yeah. Or, that immediately show the conflict. So these are all very established techniques that we should follow because they work.
Yeah. He says the first action should be a model of the hero's characteristic attitude and the future problems or solutions that will result. The first behavior we see should be characteristic. It should define and reveal character unless your intent is to mislead the audience and conceal the character's true nature.
Yeah.
He does use a book example here. He talks about Tom Sawyer. Makes a vivid entrance into our imaginations. and he tells about the painting the fence scene that everyone remembers because it is the first story there. This does make me think of stories that start with a mini adventure. We see the main character in action in a sense that they have a little mini arc story that they complete. And then you go, oh, that's the kind of person this character is. I mentioned Logan before because I love it, but the movie Logan, the one where Wolverine's an old man, it starts, of course, with a really intense fight scene, but it provides the viewer with, what he's capable of and what he's not because he's an old man now, but him still trying to do the things that he's always done. And, he's also a sour human being.
And the mini scene or the mini arc and all that is all taking place in the ordinary world to set it up for the final. So it's, again, he said you need to put a lot of information in your first chapter. And part of it you can do is to demonstrate how the character is going to act in a particular situation that's going to be reflected in the larger story arc.
Have you noticed, like in heist movies, every character has a little mini story when they are introduced? Like the lockpick guy, you've got the guys in charge. I'm going to go find the lockpick guy that I need to get into the safe. And they track him down, and he's in the middle of the job. He's the middle of a job. Every single one of them is in the middle of doing something that they're supposed to be performing.
Or how about like the Avengers movie, the first one, when they're kind of contacting people and Natasha is in the middle of an interrogation scene. Like, sorry, I got to take this. Yeah.
Oh, man, that was like the best. That was the best scene. They're beating her up and she looks like she's about to fail. And, oh, wait, excuse me. And then she kicks their ass.
So, yeah, when you have a ensemble cast where you basically introduce them each doing their thing to bring them into the...
Yeah, I guess if they have powers, right? If they are very good at what they do and they're being hired to do a thing, starting with a little like...
Or you see them screwing up.
Which comes back later, right? That foreshadows things.
Yeah, it's little mini arcs. He doesn't actually say little mini arcs, but I think we should put, you have a little mini arc in your ordinary world.
All right, not all of them, but if it fits these criteria, then yes, I'll put that in the show notes.
Okay. He also had a good line here, which is that your writing has to lure each member of the audience to projecting a part of their ego into the character on the page, screen, or stage. I like the idea of projecting a part of your ego into the main character. This is key to having someone want to follow the story and want to root for the character because suddenly it's part of you.
I don't know, break that down a little bit for me.
Okay, for my own book, I knew I was going after a fairly geeky audience that wouldn't have empathy towards a boy band performer. And so I started with the character that was the most geeky and most removed from the boy band experience, coming back and not being certain where he was. So I threw a whole bunch of geek references to make sure that the readers felt comfortable reading a story about boy bands because Kyle wasn't quite a boy band member anymore.
Right. So you weren't just trying to appeal to people who like boy bands.
No, I was specifically starting with a character that a geek audience could empathize with.
So what you're saying is you make a character that the audience will love in that sense, like who your target audience is. Make a character that's tailored to the target audience.
It's the reason why so many romance stories, the female lead is ordinary and not that special.
Wow.
So romance works that way. And then you might have a person that gets drawn into an adventure that starts off as an ordinary person that then discovers that their dad's a secret agent and suddenly they're drawn into the story. But you start off with somebody that the audience can relate to. And then because they relate to that person, then they're more invested in what comes next.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely. So are we done with the making an entrance?
Yes.
Have we made our entrance?
Yes.
All right. And then now we have introducing the hero to the audience, which didn't we just cover that?
Exactly.
Okay. How is this different? Let's find out.
I feel like he's got a thesis and he's working through it, but then he decided to put bullet points partway through and rehash what he was talking about. He has a line, you must establish a strong bond of sympathy or common interest between the hero and the audience, which was the other quote I just brought up.
Yeah, okay, so in the previous part, he says, making an entrance, and he goes, actors stepping onto a stage and writers introducing a character are also trying to, quote, entrance the audience or produce in them a trance-like state of identification and recognition. A little bit down on the page, after the other one where it says introducing the hero to the audience, it says the ordinary world is to introduce the hero to the audience. Like a social introduction, the ordinary world establishes a bond between people and points out common interests. Like that's the same thing. Establishes a strong bond of sympathy or common interest between the hero and the audience. How is this different?
Let's just say that he makes a bunch of good comments about what your hero should have, qualities, faults, yada, yada. Everyone's read this stuff. Everyone knows this stuff. We're going to jump straight to the next section.
Identification?
No, because identification also.
Holy sh...
And then we got the hero's lack. That's the thing the hero is lacking that they have to fill.
Okay, wait. So I just real quick. Mm-hmm. Identification... He did mention one thing I thought was interesting. You create not just universal qualities, but universal goals. I like that. And then the hero's lack is something's just missing. And I thought, of that wound we've talked about, that core wound.
Which is a section later on.
It's under the hero's lack.
No, we got tragic flaws, and then we got wounded heroes. Next page.
So, I can see that, they are lacking something or something is taken away from them. Often they have just lost a family member. And then tragic flaws, the Greek theory of tragedy expressed 24 centuries ago by Aristotle describes a common fault in tragic heroes. One tragic flaw or hamartia that puts them at odds with their destiny, their fellow men.
So tragic flaws, jumping over head, I think the idea of tragic flaws is you can make your hero super cool and everything, but you have to give them some major, major flaw then to make it work.
Right.
It's like if you're going to be Hercules with all these abilities, you have to have something that's going to screw you up big time.
Okay, so the hero's lack makes me think of like an emo character. Like the person who's lost their wife and they've got a big hole in their heart now that they can never fill.
The orphan.
The orphan. Yeah, yeah. But the tragic flaw, someone could just have a really big, annoying ego.
Right.
Okay, so there's a difference there. Either they're wounded because they lost something, or they're wounded because they just have a bad flaw.
Well, then if you turn the page, it says wounded heroes.
Dear, oh man. Who's editing this book? Is there an editor? I'm looking ahead. Does he have I lost some pages.
So much for that binding.
Sorry. Oh yeah, my book's falling apart.
So a wound could also be a physical wound, or it could be the pain of the child's physical and emotional separation from its mother. Isn't that a dead mother?
That's Dead Mother. Definitely Disney. Definitely works for Disney.
Anyway, so it goes on and on. We're going to jump to establishing what's at stake, because I think actually there's a few more points about what the ordinary world should do outside your main character, and let's jump to that. Establishing what's at stake. For readers and viewers to be involved in the adventure or to care about the hero, they have to know at an early stage exactly what's at stake. And I think this is an interesting contrast to the ordinary world, because technically in the ordinary world, nothing's really at stake. Bilbo in his hobbit hut is doing just fine.
Which is why Gandalf has to enter.
Right. So what's at stake is Gandalf coming and saying, but then already you're in the call stage, right?
Well, doesn't that introduce the stakes?
No, so what he's saying here is that actually there should be some stakes in the ordinary world.
Like internal stakes for the hero?
Yeah, or some sort of...
Well, wait, before Gandalf shows up, there's history. In the book, they talk about his parents. And he's partook, and they are very adventurous.
Ah.
And so he does lament a little bit about I'm a hobbit. I should be chill. My dad he definitely signed on to the hobbit lifestyle. Mom was a hobbit, but she was actually adventurous.
So there is something there. There's something in the ordinary world that has some stakes.
Within him. Yes, definitely. So he's already kind of conflicted with not going on adventures.
Mm-hmm. And in the Lord of the Rings, which is a much more serious take, we got that ring sitting there that's causing problems.
Oh, right away.
Yeah.
It's causing internal problems for Bilbo. I mean, he's addicted to it now.
Yeah. So I think what this is a good point is that when you're designing your story or designing your ordinary world, you have to have something in the ordinary world that actually sets up stakes.
You did that in your book. You made it clear that there's a hierarchy, especially when Tristan shows up. But Kyle has his own. Like he's not sure he wants to do this, and he makes it very clear where he stands in real life.
Right. The story starts with them putting the boy band back together, and the stakes are if this doesn't work out, they're going to be laughing stocks. And there's an obvious stake. Are they going to succeed in coming back together as a band? And then I jumped up to the new world where, it becomes more serious that they come together as a band, because otherwise they're going to die. But it's the same thing.
Right. But Kyle has his own internal arc, and it gets established.
Right. Is Kyle going to be able to be part of this band again?
Right.
In the music industry versus is he going to be part of this band in the adventuring business?
But beyond that, he used to be best friends with Tristan.
Yeah, and there's a bit of that.
And they
as
have
well.
to repair that.
Right. But honestly, part of stakes is it should be something external. Like it helps if it's external. If it's a quest or an adventure, it helps if there's like a very physical.
Well, there's the inner and there's the outer, right?
There's the inner and the outer. But I think a lot of times when people think about the stakes, they're not thinking about the emotional well-being of the character as well as they're thinking about the big picture, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
For a quest or a genre fiction book.
Right.
For non-genre fiction, that works. For genre fiction, you need to see something's happening. Right. The audience is there for something to happen. The audience is there for to be some kind of stakes, something on the line for the character beyond psychological.
Howl's Moving Castle? What happens with Sophie? So the very beginning is you can tell she wants to go on an adventure, but she's resigned herself. She can't because she's too old.
No, because at the beginning, the stakes are that Fanny is going to have her back in the hat shop sewing hats for the rest of her life with no compensation. And that's an ordinary world problem that she's running into. That's nothing to do with the magic curse or anything. Like, she is in a point where if she doesn't do something, she is going to spend the rest of her life doing nothing.
Right.
And that's not going to make her happy.
But now she's forced to go on an adventure whether she wanted to or not.
That's after the ordinary world. But in the ordinary world, there has to be stakes for the character.
Right.
In The Hobbit, it's a very standard adventure. It's not deep and dark, but even there we have, is Bilbo going to just be a hobbit for the rest of life, or is he going to have an adventure? Those are the stakes. And then we get the adventure coming. But first, it's established in the real world, in the ordinary world. So you can't just count on having a big adventure come to an ordinary person. There should be something with them before they go.
Right. Just, real quick, Vogler says, scripts often fail because the stakes simply aren't high enough. A story in which the hero will only be slightly embarrassed or inconvenienced if he fails is likely to get the so what.
Yeah. Shout outs to my husband who always reads my story and says, Kim, you have to be more outrageous. No one's going to catch this. This is way too subtle. You need to show it more.
Thanks, Magic.
Yeah.
So are we moving on?
I think so. Next up, backstory and exposition.
Oh, man.
Backstory is the relevant character's history and background. Sounds good. And exposition is the art of gracefully revealing it. I think just exposition is the revealing it. Because too often you hear, that's not very good exposition.
I'm kind of confused here. Backstory is the plot behind the plot. What happened before?
Mm-hmm.
Exposition is them telling it.
Yeah, gracefully or not.
Gracefully or not, yeah.
I think this is one of those cases where he just wants to make the sentence sound better.
I guess he just wants to make a distinction. I'm not sure if I understand his distinction. We're complaining a lot, and I feel like I'm finding things to complain about, but I'm not because they're right in my face.
Yep.
It's hard to read this.
Here's the thing. I think this book has a lot of good stuff going into it, but if you, the listener, are going to read it, you should be aware if you're straying from the page, if you're feeling like it's not going anywhere, it's repeating itself, it's because it does. It totally does. Go get yourself a glass of wine, keep going.
I really don't think this book is going to make anyone a better writer. It might make your screenplay a little better for plot purposes, but this book does not teach you how to write well.
It does not teach you how to write. It teaches you how to plot.
Right.
And it teaches you how to take a story you already written and figure out what's wrong with it.
Right. But it is not helping you to become a good writer.
Yeah.
All right, just had to establish that. He says, clumsy exposition tends to stop the story cold. Blunt exposition draws attention to itself, giving the backstory in the form of a voiceover or a quote-unquote Harry the Explainer character, which is my big beef with, what's the show? Sweet Tooth. Would someone just shoot that narrator? Because he just says the things that are so obvious, and he says it in a smug, annoying way.
Like you, the audience, are so stupid.
Almost. Well, he just wants to drive home some kind of, like lesson or point or something. And it's like, we get it. Shut up. We know you're the character that's a kid that's grown up, but you're not adding anything. You just make me want to smack you around. I'm very violent. This book is making me so violent.
It's a big book. Be very effective at being violent with.
I know. I could really hurt someone, yeah. You could kill a man with this book.
He also says the audience will feel more involved if they have to work a little to piece together the backstory from visual clues or exposition blurted out while the characters are emotionally upset or on the run. I think readers do enjoy when they're putting it together and they're figuring it out. On the other hand, I think that a lot of writers are too subtle on their first try. I got a lot of feedback when I got to the line edits of like, let's actually say what Kyle thinks about each of these characters he's running into in the beginning, because we don't know. And I'm like, but I had the particular words he chose and the particular slight attitude that he had, but that wasn't clear. It needed to be a bit more clear. So much like you realize at a certain point that you had to do some telling in your showing. You can have the people piece them together, but maybe check with somebody outside of you to see if you're being too subtle or too clever. Because then people aren't going to catch any of it and they won't notice it.
I'm reading a book right now that did this. So I talk about Sideways, the movie. Well, I've read the novel.
Okay.
Apparently it's a trilogy. So I'm on the second novel now, and it's called Vertical. And it's really good.
I like the naming scheme.
It's really funny. It's another road trip story, and this time he's got, his friend Jake, but now he's got his mother who's suffered a stroke, and then she's also on a slew of medications, and he's got her caregiver. So of course, hijinks will ensue. There's this scene where he asks his mother, hey, because she's very elderly now and she's about to die. And he goes, I remember you disappeared for a year when I was a kid and Dad had to take care of us. And I'm just kind of curious what happened there. And he assumed she had a mental breakdown and ended up in a hospital. And she refuses to talk about it. But that's coming back. Mm-hmm. Right? And he even thinks, I wonder if she was having an affair.
That's more foreshadowing than it is background.
It's backstory, though.
Right. So he's asking about something that happened in the past, but we're talking about you as the writer giving background character for your audience to understand your characters better.
Well, he even says, he goes, I've talked to my therapists a lot about this. I've been to 4 therapists, and we've all, tried to break down what that year did to me. And maybe if it's the source of my trauma or something. He does say that.
Okay, so yeah.
It is backstory. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Rex Pickett is the author of Sideways and Vertical and the other books.
Okay. So that's what we'll say about background?
Yep.
Okay. Theme. I like that he thinks he can break down theme into a single page because that's really easy. I mean, theme's one of the most bleeding, hardest things to understand about your story. It needs at least its own chapter.
Yeah.
He does say that the ordinary world is the place to state the theme of your book. And I wrote, how?
Oh, I've got that word how everywhere. How so? What's at stake? What are you talking about?
I do think it's useful to have a single word theme for your book because too often someone says, well, what's the theme? And they start giving you a paragraph. And it's true, it's big, but you really should be able to come down with one single word theme. And if you're jumping around a whole bunch of different things, it's not a theme.
Interesting.
You say, well, my theme of my book is the journey that we take when we understand our past. That's pretty wordy. So a single word, my book theme is friendship.
Mine would be grief.
Maybe, yeah.
Or mom.
Maybe grief.
Grief, yeah. Or reconciliation.
Maybe reconciliation.
Something like that, yeah.
And you can have two. You can say grief and reconciliation.
What about Kaiju? Preservation Society. I don't know yet.
That might not be the worst time because otherwise he's just going into an analogy about the Wizard of Oz. And I think we should just jump to Kaiju. But I wanted to say that his questions for the journey, these are things that are supposed to make your book better or whatever.
Prompts. He actually has prompts.
But number 6 is, do different cultures need different kinds of stories? ? Do men and women need different kinds of stories? ? How are the heroic journeys of men and women different? ? I don't think we're in the area of writing prompts anymore. That's a college essay.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. But he does have other questions. In your own writing, how well do you know your hero? Do a complete biographical sketch. We've covered that before. Do a timeline. Specifying what the character was doing, when and where in every stage of life. Found out what was going on. That could be good. Yeah, that could be a good prompt. We actually kind of already did one with Judith Barrington's writing the memoir. We did the timeline.
Mm-hmm. But he never talked about timelines in this chapter. I just feel like he's pulling stuff from other writing books that he's expecting you to do. First one's actually kind of what we're going to do, which is...
what is the ordinary world of The Martian, Black Swan, Frozen, Sully?
Yep.
Look at a film, play, or story of your choice. How does the author introduce the hero, reveal character, give exposition, suggest the theme? Does the author use an image to foreshadow or suggest where the story is going?
So we're going to basically cover all that in our analysis of Kaiju Preservation Society.
Exactly.
Thank you guys all for waiting, because now it's going to get fun. Background for the story. The basic gist of the story is this guy gets hired to go to a world that's like Earth but different, with kaijus, to work with an organization that protects the kaijus.
It's literally a preservation society to preserve kaijus.
The title says it all.
Yeah. But the very beginning, the main character is not protecting kaijus. He doesn't know they exist yet. He is in a job where is it like a tech job?
Food Mud. It's a food delivery. It's Uber Eats.
Yeah. Food mood.
Anyway.
With the umlauts. So he's going to talk to the CEO, and he's hoping to get a raise or a, what's the word that you get when you...
Promotion.
That's the word.
Before the beginning, like Renee said, it's got a great cover. The picture on the cover is the title of the book of like some kind of ID badge with blood on it. And it looks great.
Yeah.
Also, the audiobook puts the author's notes at the beginning, so you come into the story knowing what caused him to want to write this book. And the opening scene is truly introduces the character wonderfully. I think makes a really good entrance. Walked into the CEO's office. It was the time for my performance review, and I'm not going to lie, I was going to crush it. He doesn't crush it, dear leaders.
No, I'm sorry, spoiler here, but they fire him and say, but you can be a food delivery driver.
A deliberator.
A deliberator.
I think that's one of those examples where your foreshadowing is you say this character is going to do this one thing, and the readers by this point are intelligent to know enough that no, that's not going to happen.
You know, he does bring backstory in. He talks about that deliberator name. He goes, well, isn't that like from Snow Crash, the book? And everyone's like, what's Snow Crash? And they haven't read it. But that's backstory, because in later chapters, you learn that he wrote a thesis to get his master's degree by analyzing sci-fi.
Right. Let's go into Ordinary World. This is a very heavy dialogue book. There's a bit of description, but mostly he just reveals everything in dialogue. How do you feel about that, Renee?
I mean, that's a style. Usually the books that are written, like it's mostly dialogue, they go fast.
Yes.
You read these things, and I don't know why, but we read dialogue faster than just description and prose. So it's a fast book.
Yeah. So basically, on the second page, he's giving his pitch to the CEO, Rob, about what his idea is. And his line is, it's 2020 now in the food delivery app space, yada, yada, yada. And then he finishes with, you've heard about this COVID-19 thing. I have, Rob says. I think that's all you need. Like, you know, it's 2020. You've heard about this COVID-19 thing. You know exactly when that's happening, exactly that space. I think this book might lose its relevance in about 10 years' time when people have kind of forgotten that. But it's a bit like the Kennedy assassination. For people that lived through it, something clicks in their brain and they're back in that moment. And this really does click in your brain, March 2020.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say with The Ordinary World is the visual imagery. I thought a really good visual imagery in this is as Jamie goes in for his performance review, the CEO invites him to sit in a beanbag chair, which is squishy and he can't quite keep his bearings. I think that's a nice metaphor for the uncomfortableness that's coming.
I picked the red beanbag and sank into it only a little awkwardly. My tablet briefly flopped out of my hand and I caught it before it skittered off the beanbag and onto the floor. I looked up at Sanders, who was still standing, and smiled. He smiled back, rolled over a standard desk chair, and sat in backwards, arms crossed over the back. He got a chair. It's almost like an informal...
Actually, the next line is, oh, I see. CEO power move. Very nice, I thought. It's a good visual metaphor. He wrote this book so someone could adapt it to a screenplay very easily.
Yeah, books definitely, when they're written mostly in dialogue, they could easily be turned into a screenplay. Do you think they're going to try to make a movie out of this?
I wouldn't be surprised if I'm sure somebody has optioned it. So I think that takes care of the ordinary world. And I think the next thing is the characters.
The hero.
Yep. What do you think the hero's problem is?
The hero's problem, well, his outer problem is that he loses his job and he has to become a delivery driver.
And one more thing.
He has to pay the rent.
To keep his friends.
For himself, but also, so in the very end, the stakes are made very clear. His friends, who are his roommates, they're going to move out because the pandemic has happened. And they're like, dude, we can't afford the rent. What are we going to do? I guess we're just going to go move in with our parents. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
You stay here. I will find a way. And his way is to open up the delivery app and make himself an account.
Yes.
So he could become a delivery driver, which I thought was the Herald.
No, because he's still in the main world.
Through the delivery app, I thought that was like the outside thing that gets him out of the house. That like the call to get out.
No.
To move on.
No.
Is it the business card in the next chapter where he's like, oh, here's another job?
It's the next chapter because the call by the Deliverator app is not any adventure. It's sinking into horribleness.
So is the call to adventure happening in the second chapter or is it getting fired?
No. Call to adventure happens in the second chapter. The first one, this is all this kind of like mini version. Mini story. It's creating stakes. He has to do these jobs to help his roommates stay in New York. These are all ordinary world problems. It's clearly first chapter is ordinary world, next chapter call to adventure.
Right.
Which we'll cover in the next podcast. The other thing that this does is Jamie is instantly identifiable and instantly likable.
Yeah. He wants to take care of his friends.
Yeah, and now, even before that, he's got an asshole boss.
Yeah.
That's immediately identifiable to an audience.
He's also funny.
He's funny. He's smart at what he's doing. He's not appreciated for it.
I can definitely identify with that. Kim is an awful boss. I'm just kidding. You don't know what she does to me, dear listener.
I'm not the boss of you.
You're not, no. I'm just kidding.
And top of everything else, we've got him in March of the pandemic that we all experienced. So there's just a natural empathy because he's in the same situation that we were in to a greater extent for some people. But, it's something we all have empathy with because we all lived through that time.
Right. He also knows a little bit more than the people around him in terms of geekdom. And I identify with that. There's this one scene about the deliverator. He goes, our delivery people. And the CEO says, deliverators. I shifted in the beanbag. What? Deliverators. That's what we're calling them now. Clever, right? I thought up the term. I thought Neil Stephenson did. Who? He's a writer. He wrote Snow Crash. And that's what, a Frozen sequel? It's a book, actually. Rob waved his hand dismissively. If it's not Disney, we won't get sued for it. You were saying? Like, we've all had bosses like that, right? They're dumb and...
Hopefully you haven't had a boss as bad as Rob because he is truly a piece of human excrement.
We've all been in situations where we're talking to a piece of human excrement.
Yes.
And that's what happens.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. Also, it's annoying to just steal things from authors and artists. And that's what they're doing. They're just trying to steal from artists. The word deliverator. This guy, Neil Stephenson, I've never heard of him, so he can't hurt us.
Yeah.
As long as it's not Disney. I don't know. And I identify that with that because, people don't pay artists and they should.
Yeah. And then theme. Did you get a sense for the theme of the book?
Sacrifice. So far. Or grit. Like he just sucks it up and moves on. That's what I got. What do you got?
Well, I read the whole book, so I'm a bit more advantage here.
We're just talking about the first chapter.
Yes, but it actually sets it up. It's community. It's the fact that he and his roommates are pulling together to stay in New York, to survive this pandemic together, and this connections between people to overcome things as a group.
Duty.
No, not duty. Duty is something you have to do. This is something you do for your friends because you want to do.
Okay.
Because together you're stronger and you're going to do something worthwhile.
All right. That's a very pandemic theme.
It is. It's very uplifting. This is a feel-good book. Even in the worst of things, Jamie never feels sorry for himself. And he never feels like he has to do something or he wants to give up or anything like that. He's always positive, always has friends.
So Kim says that this is a feel-good book, but just keep in mind, dear listener, that if you buy this book, the cover has a badge on it and there's blood on the badge.
Adventure.
Okay. Blood's okay. Feel-good blood bath book.
I think one thing we should do at the end of each analysis is, do we feel that the book is following the hero's journey?
So far, yes.
Very much so.
And I have read a few more chapters than this. Yeah. You've read the whole book and you say it does follow the journey pretty well.
I think so. Like the later parts of the journey are a little more fuzzy in my mind, so I'll have to check that out. I mean, the hero's journey is one of the things that's really clear. The first 3 to 5 stages are really clear, and after that, it kind of goes all over the place. So, but I think it will.
Okay, so if you are struggling with the beginning of your book or you've got a draft and you want to make sure that you've got those first 5 plot steps and you want to see somebody who's done it and you want to write a page turner, it would be good to read the first 5 or 6 chapters of the Kaiju Preservation Society as a nice model for how you might want to do it, dear listener.
A more modern take as opposed to something like The Hobbit, which is much more old style. This is written in a modern style for a modern audience who are more aware of these techniques.
Oh, yeah. And this is done really well.
That too.
Unless you were studying the writer's journey or the hero's journey, it's not super clear that he's just following plot points because John Scalzi's a good writer.
Mm-hmm. But part of the reason he was able to write this book in 2 months is because he knew what these stages were.
Oh, did he say that?
No, he didn't say that, but he wrote this in 2 months. He had a structure that worked, and the structure is very similar to the writer's journey, and he knew that structure from the beginning, and that's part of the reason he was able to write it so quickly and so completely.
Right. Okay. Oh, it wasn't last night. It was the night before. I went and saw Terminator in the theater. It was amazing. I mean, I've seen it a bunch of times, but the first one, oddly, it wasn't the second one. And it was a perfect screenplay. Like, not one line of dialogue is extra. Every single thing that's said has a purpose. And it's just so nice and tight and kind of perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that one also follows the hero's journey. Very classic 80s sci-fi genre hero journey.
As we were saying that, actually something comes to mind, which is part of the trick that makes the hero's journey work is when you have a genuinely interesting, different idea. So while the beats are all very similar, you come up with something completely different than what people expect.
Mm-hmm.
So writing a hero's journey where you simply have the farm boy that gets called to quest is a lot harder to make great as opposed to the fired tech worker that gets called to preserve kaiju.
Right.
It's a predictable plot that works better when you have a surprising set of ideas.
Yeah. Bickham had a good activity for that, is to come up with different twists to make sure that your audience can't necessarily predict what's going to happen.
But I'm not even talking about the twist. I'm talking about from the very get-go. And the Terminator is another one. I mean, from the very get-go, it's different than other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a standard, person meets somebody from traveling from. I mean, like there's some new hook. There's some new element that makes it exciting. And then the hero's journey allows it to be told in a way that the audience can understand and follow. Because the actual premise of it is brand new and maybe unexpected.
Yeah. It follows what Vogler was talking about with the opening image even. It foreshadows, because it starts in the apocalypse world. Just real quick, you get a quick glimpse of it. And you're like, is that the ordinary world? But then it's clear the ordinary world is our world. And then they come in. And you think that the journey is Reese, the human coming to protect
Sarah
Connor. That's right. Thank you. So you think it's Reese, the guy who goes back in time to help Sarah Connor keep her alive from the Terminator. But actually, it's her. She is the hero. Mm-hmm. She's the one who changes in the end. I mean, actually, they both do. It's like these two simultaneous journeys going on, at the same time. And it was so expertly done how they took someone who, she's not like meek or anything. She's just an ordinary woman. She's got a 9 to 5. She sometimes shows up late. She's a nice person. She's got a fun roommate. She's young. She's going on dates,
What you said right now and kind of looking at stuff is the hero's journey is a great set of plot points or plot markers to use when you have a very original idea that you can't quite figure out how to present it to an audience so they understand it. And the Terminator, Kaiju Preservation Society are all very interesting ideas that if the person was rambling or they didn't use these clear markers and this clear structure, we would not enjoy it nearly as much. Mm-hmm. So props to Vogler.
Well, props to Joseph Campbell.
Props to Joseph Campbell.
Props to ancient mythology and our human brains for having the capacity for fiction and narrative.
I also liked the comment about Scalzi saying that it all popped into his mind, which kind of goes along with the idea that there's these that we actually have in our narrative brains, this structure that's just waiting to come out.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's how the Frankenstein book came to me. The Frankenstein's monster. I was lecturing on Frankenstein, the book. And I was like, wait a minute.
Well, the idea of it came to you, but you couldn't have written it in a month and a half after coming up with the idea. Like he said, the whole story was just
whole story.
This whole story was in his mind. Like all the points along the way just were there.
Well, he's also, how many novels has he written?
Yeah, he's written over 20 novels, I'm sure, by this point. So,
right.
But, there's maybe some truth to the matter that it's ingrained. Anyway, we have gone way over time.
You're going to have a job ahead of you with editing this episode.
It's going to be long.
I'm sorry, Cam. I will try not to make the show notes so long like I did last time.
Yeah. You have a memoir to write. Thank you guys all for listening.
Thank you. Oh, don't forget to tip us if you can. So we have a tip jar. You can go to our website, wordstowritebypodcast.com, and you can, buy us a coffee. That would be really awesome. And, there are also show notes that are not just show notes. I call them snark notes. And they break down all of the main stuff that we talk about on this episode. And I take it a step further and I even give examples for things.
And we pay attention to hierarchy and organization, so you will not be reading the same thing again and again.
Yeah, definitely. And if you thought we did a good job and, we saved you the bother of having to read Vogler, then you can maybe buy us a coffee.
Or we convince you to go out and start reading this new book by Scalzi. There you go, too.
Yeah, you could be like, dude, the book was great and my life is better for it. Here is a couple bucks. And we would be very... What were you going to say?
I was going to say that the next section is the call, and that will probably be the chapter 2, maybe chapter 3. So if you can actually read this book one chapter at a time.
If you're reading along.
Yeah, but you can also just finish the book really fast and then tell Renee spoilers.
Hey, here's looking at you, Yvonne and Daryl. If you're listening to this episode
all the way to the end. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
Cut it all out. Cut it out. Sorry.
We're going to Renee's show.
Renee show. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's going to end up at the end of the episode.